Hey guys, Carbonyl DotA here, 7K MMR coach and educational content creator for Dota 2. I'm excited today to bring you guys the first part in a new series that I'm making. That is what you need to know to improve at Dota 2. My goal with this is to mention every concept I can think of in fairly general terms, although we will be going into certain details or give specific examples, but to bring you all the concepts you need to understand to rank up. And some of these, a lot of people will already know. This is generally going to be targeted more towards the lower ranks, like Legend and below. Maybe Legends will have heard or sort of have a sense of every single thing I will say in the series. But I think knowing your fundamentals matters either way, and this will be especially helpful for lower rank players who struggle in their games, aren't sure what to do all the time, and things like that. Like how do I improve? What do I need to know? Well, a lot of these things, I hope to say them and share them and describe them, and then you'll be like, oh, I didn't really know that. I'll think about that in my games moving forward. That's kind of the goal for people who might not know some of these. So with that said, let's get into it. Today, part one, fundamentals of winning a match. This is going to be really basic, but also just a good conceptual framework for understanding how Dota games work. So we're going to start by talking about the order of objectives. And by objectives, hopefully you know this, but towers, Roshan. Those are the objectives on the map. There's tier 1 towers, tier 2 towers, tier 3 towers, which are the high ground towers. And technically there's tier 4s. Those aren't really an objective. They're just what you need to take to win the game. And then there's Roshan, taking the Roshan, getting the Aegis to the Immortal, and then later Cheese, Aghanim Scepter, Refresher Shard, all that good stuff. Another thing that I want to say about the order of objectives is this is your general path, general guideline, your kind of North Star of what will typically happen in your average game. Of course, there are games, there's, hundreds of thousands of games being played every day, or, thousands, whatever. There are variants in what's happening. My goal here is to lay out the general path of what you should be looking to do. Of course, other stuff will come up, but when all else fails, you're not sure what you should be doing. This is kind of the core. And you could think of it as a checkbox. Well, have we done this yet? Have we done this? Well, maybe we need to do this before we do that. Here we go. Number one, the enemy safe lane tier 1 tower. That's the first objective that is most commonly taken in most Dota games. It's usually the easiest to take because the safe laner tends to be the position 1 carry, tends to be the weakest kind of tower defender and weakest hero early on. So this tower is most likely to fall. It's also really good to boot the carry out of their lane and make them go farm somewhere else less efficiently. So teams on average want to take this tower early, kick the carry out, and then increase their map control in the area of the map, the jungle area surrounding it, and be able to farm there safely without the enemy having their tower to TP into. So the enemy safe lane tier 1 is the number 1 objective on average that you should look to take with your team. The second objective is the enemy middle tier 1. This is their tower in the mid lane by the river. Sometimes this will fall before the safe lane tier 1. Obviously, it depends, but on average, this is the second tower after you've taken the enemy safe lane tier 1 tower that you should look to take. The advantages are pretty obvious. The enemy no longer has access to defending their middle portion of the map with a tower. It's much easier to move around. They have less rune control. And, if you can cross through the middle of the map without having to worry about a bunch of enemies being nearby or showing up, you're safer when you're moving around the map yourself. The third objective, and this is an optional one, by what I mean is you should take this third after the enemy safe lane in tier 1 if it's still fairly early on in the game, I'll say pre-20 minutes, and your team is fairly strong, and this will be a fairly easy tower for you to take, and you don't think they can really contest you, or if they try to, they'll lose the fight. So do not overemphasize this. Do not give up a lot of map control or anything in order to take this. You don't need to bring all 5 heroes and make a concerted push here. If you're on even ground with the enemy, this is typically a bad thing to do. But if you are doing well in your game, you've already taken the enemy safe lane tier 1 and mid tier 1, and you feel strong, you can come take this, and it is fine, given those caveats I said. Now, when you are not particularly stronger than your opponent, it's just not good to get all your heroes in this area of the map, your enemy's offlane tier 1 tower, because there's not a lot of important other objectives around here. There's not a lot of camps that this opens up for your team, and generally it just gives access to the enemy triangle and ancient camps, which you're not going to be doing early anyways. So as a whole, this tower is just less important overall. Take it if it's convenient and you're strong and it's easy. Don't force this tower. So this is number 3, but with the caveat. So we've taken the enemy safe lane tier 1, the enemy mid tier 1, and maybe we've taken their off lane tier 1, maybe not, doesn't matter. The next objective we want to take before we pressure any tier 2 towers is Roshan. And what time in the game you take this will depend on your lineup and if you can get your team to cooperate and be on the same page. Sometimes you can take it really early with Slardar, TA, Ursa, other heroes like that. Sometimes it takes a long time to be able to take this, even if your team wants to, even if you're ahead, because your heroes just happen to be bad at doing it. So this is the next objective you should look to take before any tier 2s. But before you take Roshan, you should really look to take the enemy safe lane and tier 1 towers. And the only exception to that would be sometimes you can take this even before the enemy mid lane tier 1 tower if you just have a really strong Roshan hero that can sneak in there and get it. So once you've taken the enemy safe lane tier 1, enemy mid lane tier 1, and Roshan and have the Aegis, your next objectives are just all the tier 2s on the map. There's no real particular order these days with the map updates of the new frontiers in terms of which is most important. It used to be the enemy safe lane tier 2. That one's always a safe bet. But these days, because it's so easy for heroes to like get around and farm the outskirts of the edges, the enemy safe lane tier 2 doesn't quite shut off as much farm as it used to. So it's not really more important than any of the other tier 2s. I would say that the mid tier 2 is still the hardest to take, but if you're really strong, it is good to take. So I'm not giving an order here on the tier 2s and what order you take them. Generally you want to be having a decent amount of map control, not letting your other 2 lanes push in while you're pushing 1 lane, and then take whichever ones make sense wherever you can get your team to group up without having lost map control everywhere else. So you've taken the tier 2s, hopefully with that first Aegis, or maybe you've taken 1 or 2 of them and you're no longer strong enough. Your Aegis has ran out, or a fight happened, or you lost it, or whatever. Before you go high ground or finish taking the tier 2s, usually you want to take Roshan again when it respawns. So just so you know, this is really basic, but Roshan, when you kill it, the Aegis lasts for 5 minutes, and then after it died, it respawns between 8 and 11 minutes after it first died. So you take it, and then 8 to 11 minutes from then, it will be up again, regardless of when you lost the Aegis. So you want to take the Roshan again, and then you can proceed to take other towers, any tier 2s you haven't gotten, and you can go high ground, usually with this second Aegis. And of course, there are exceptions, as there always are. Sometimes you can go high ground earlier without Aegis if you're just stomping. Sometimes getting this second Aegis really doesn't make high ground possible. High ground is really difficult, but generally, this is the order of objectives. High ground, Roshan again if you need to, rinse and repeat, try and get Aegis before you go high ground. Those are the order of objectives. The next thing I want to talk about is the phases of the game, and this is just going to be a very simple breakdown of what the different phases in the game are and how you should think about them. So if you are Archon and above, you probably have like a sense of this, but it's important, I think, to lay out these concrete, and they're not concrete, there's a little bit of variability depending on your rank and what's happening in the game, but these general phases, because you want to think about what you're trying to do in each phase as it changes. So phase number 1 is the laning stage. Starts at 0 minutes, and it lasts between 7 and 12 minutes, and this duration will change based on your rank. So at higher ranks, immortal, it will not last a long time, around 7-8 minutes. The lanes are already starting to break down. Heroes are leaving their lanes and going to other lanes and really not intending to go back. And at lower ranks, the lower you go, the longer the laning stage lasts. Heralds sometimes like 12, 13, 14 minutes. People are still like playing their lanes normally and not rotating around. It can just depend. So between 7 and 12 minutes is when the laning stage will typically break down. average probably around 8-9 minutes, right? The power runes come out at 6. Usually a gank or something might happen, but then they'll still lane a little bit more. But once the 8-minute rune starts coming out and everybody starts getting their ultimates, which is around 9 to 12 minutes, there's not really the power spikes of the different teams and which heroes are strong changes so drastically that you can't really just lane anymore because you're susceptible to a bunch of heroes just coming and killing you with all their ultimates, things like that. So the laning stage will break down around 7 to 12 minutes. In the laning stage, there's a little bit of a breakdown in this 0 to 7 or 12 minutes of what should be happening. There's like little mini stages, I guess, within the laning stages, or just different parts of time you should be thinking about different things. So 0 to 5 minutes of all the lanes is only about cores getting farm. Cores need to try and hit creeps. Supports need to do whatever they can to enable their cores to hit creeps. So that is just being there and being able to cast spells to keep the enemy team off their carry. Maybe you kill them, but the kills are not a priority. You are providing regen for them if they need it. You are pulling to fix the lane equilibrium if they need it. Those are the things that are happening in the 0 to 5 minute phase. Focus on the creeps. Supports, all you need to do is figure out how to get your carry the most creeps possible. If they're hitting creeps, they're happy. You don't have to be killing them to be doing well in your lane. You should also look to contest the 3-minute Lotus when possible. So from 3 to 8 minutes, right, the core is still farming. Supports are still enabling them. If supports die, they should be considering every respawn to TP bid and refill the runes. The mid's bottle, if they have a bottle, that is really, really important. Supports also want to contest the power runes at 6 minutes. In some cases, you can even show up at a 4-minute water rune. And you definitely want to help at the 8-minute runes as well on supports. And if the cores need to, if they're having a really bad lane, they can start to retreat to the jungle at some point. 7-minute wisdom runes are also really important, either securing yours or trying to steal theirs. In the end of the laning stage, I'll say 6 to 12 minutes. Supports are looking to perhaps leave their lane. It depends on what's going on. If your core is doing well, you can continue to enable them. If your core is not doing well and you're not having a big impact in your lane, you should really look as a support to be having an impact in another lane. Leaving a bad lane and moving to another one is a great way to improve the overall situation for your team. So these rotations should start to be happening as the laning stage is coming to its conclusion. Are your cores farming? Can you help them at this point? Sometimes you can't help them anymore because the enemy core is too strong, so go look to have the impact somewhere else. The mids will be rotating with runes as appropriate, and you should look to pressure any towers that are pressurable depending on the heroes that you have. The second phase of the game, I call the post-laning early game stage. So you're not in your lanes anymore, but you're also not in what the third stage is, which is mid-game. There's this phase between laning and getting to the mid-game where, and I think this is the hardest part of the game for a lot of people, and I'm not really going to get into it in this video, but it's anywhere from the 7 to 12 minute, whenever the laning stage ends, to about 18 to 25 minutes. And the reason that this marker is here and not somewhere else is the 18 to 25 minutes is generally when the carries or the cores start to get like 2 major items, or like kind of like one little middle item and then like their first big item. So the carries will reach a point where they want to like contribute and fight and not just farm. And also a lot of lineups be able to hit Roshan somewhere in this period, if not earlier, and they have a good Roshan hero. So the first Roshan will be on the table and carries are going to want to be participating. And that kind of marks the end of this post-laning early game stage and then marks the beginning of the mid game. And it just tends to happen around that phase. And you need to play this phase differently than you want to play the next phase, right? In this phase, carries are farming, they're not participating a lot. The mid and the offlaner heroes are typically pretty strong and controlling the map tempo, and supports are pretty strong in this phase, and they want to play with their strong cores, usually the offlaner or the mid, and make plays, maybe gank the enemy carry, slow them down, or take a lead with different skirmishes and fights. Towers can be falling, as we already talked about with the order of objectives. Typically the tier 1s are falling in this stage, right? Most teams haven't taken Roshan. Whatever tier 1 towers are going to fall around this stage of the game. But then it's pre-Roshan and before any tier 2s fall. So that's the stage number 2. The third stage is the mid game. So this happens from the 18 to 25 minutes, whatever it is at your rank, to about 30 to 40 minutes. This stage is characterized by carries being willing to participate, team fights being very common with lots of heroes, if not all 10, but also fights being very dependent on your cooldowns. And this happens in the late game as well, but the mid game is the first stage where this happens, where the fighting is very dependent on cooldowns, long cooldown ultimates, things like that, items like BKB being on cooldown, wanting to avoid fights while that's happening. And you're taking the Roshan, the first Roshan here. One of the teams is, they're probably pressuring tier 2s, you're responding to that, and the carries are still trying to get like their third, fourth item. So they're becoming stronger, everybody's still ramping up, but a lot of stuff is starting to happen, and big team fight groups are common, plays, smokes, all that is common. But it's not always 5-on-5s all the time. A lot of times there's still like one hero or two heroes on the outskirts of the map all the time, trying to split push and all that good stuff. So that is phase number 3, the mid game. And then we have the late game stage, 30 to 40 minutes onward. And this is going to be, the carries have like 4 items. The most important aspect of this game is getting Roshan whenever it's available, contesting Roshan whenever it's available, and then being as 5 whenever you're looking to take a big engagement. Like, so pickoffs are still possible. If you have good information, you can do pickoffs or smaller skirmishes, but grouping up as 5 when everybody has their ultimates available is the best consistent way to win fights at this stage in the game, and especially a lower MMRs, I mean really all MMRs, but just higher MMRs tend to do this correctly. Lower MMRs, a lot of the fights in this phase are just determined by who happened to bring more heroes and who actually made the coordinated attempt to make a play versus just farming randomly, and then eventually one team runs into another team, and then one team will just happen to have more heroes there, and then they'll win. So late game, really important to have all your heroes together for every big engagement you want to take. Make sure you have your cooldowns, and make sure you're contesting all the Roshans. And then there's ultra late, which is 60 minutes plus. I'm not really going to talk about that as a stage. You just get the tier 5 neutral items, crazy stuff happens. Most important thing, be together. Every hero matters a lot. Don't feed, buyback's really important, etc., etc. Okay, so to wrap up this video with our last concept, timings and objectives, really what I just want to do is lay out again how the laning phase, how the different game phases sort of tie into the ideal objectives that you want to be taking in that phase. In the laning phase, you want to be looking to take the tier 1. You can take tier 1s for any lane that's doing really well. If the off laner in position 4 are kicking butt, oftentimes they will kick the safe laner out and even take the tower between 7 and 12 minutes. You typically aren't taking it with the first catapult at 5, but a lot of times that second catapult at 10 or even just around 8 or 9, you've kicked the carry out. If you've got a great lane matchup and you can overwhelm the carry, kill them a couple times or whatever, a lot of times you can take those tier 1s. Sometimes if one hero is particularly dominant in mid or is really good at taking towers, they'll have taken the mid lane tower even just by themselves. Heroes like Morphling are really good at doing this. TA, Shadow Fiend, if they're like really owning their lane, they can really pressure the tower and kill it. Pugna is a great example. Death Prophet, DK, different heroes sometimes can take their mid towers. That's my cat, Turbo. So tier 1s for any lane doing really well are the objectives that would fall. Not crucial to take. Oh, and I should say sometimes even your safe laner will take the enemy offlane tier 1 tower early if they just crush. And so, like a Wraith King or a Juggernaut, those are the two ones that come to mind where they have the ability to just like whack the tower and kind of safely do it because like Jug can spin and get away, or Wraith King has skeletons. So sometimes they'll even take that tower. Not really crucial they do so, but sometimes they will. So the tier 1s for any lane doing really well is really the only objectives that get taken in the laning phase. And really, it's too early to do Roshan on any hero, even an Ursa or a Huskar or something. So the post lane early game, the enemy safe lane tier 1 and mid tier 1, as we talked about. The off lane tier 1 is optional, not required. And Roshan, if you have a good Roshan hero or good Roshan lineup. Those are the objectives you want to be looking to take in this phase. The mid game, you want to take the enemy safe lane and mid tier 1 if you have not yet taken those, and sometimes you haven't, and those are still really important to take. You want to take the first Roshan for all lineups. So starting around the early phase in this mid game, around 18 to 25 minutes, basically any lineup can take Roshan around this time. You could almost say the mid game is defined by the time that your lineup can like take Roshan, and then once you get it, you're kind of in the mid game at that point. And then using that first Aegis, you want to start taking tier 2s, pressuring tier 2s. Then you can take the second Roshan if you did the first one early. So if you did the first one in like the really early on, now you can take the second one here in the mid game. And if you're doing really well and if you're really far ahead, you can consider going high ground with the second Aegis. And then the late game, the highest priority is taking or contesting the Roshan when it's up. You want to take any outer towers remaining when possible. Sometimes you obviously have to be careful. The enemies will be strong. So it depends on the game state as whether you can or not. But whenever you can, you should. And you want to go high ground when you have the advantage, which is either a hero number advantage, you have more heroes alive than they do, and or you have the Aegis. Sometimes you need both. High ground is really hard to break all the time. So that is the end of this video, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed kind of the fundamental basics of how you go about winning a Dota game, the objectives you should take, about when that should happen. There's a million different specifics and variations just because there's so many different heroes. But hopefully this gives you guys a good outline of how your Dota game should go. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I look forward to bringing you guys more concepts on different parts of the game in future videos for this series. Carbonyl Dota, catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, sub to the channel. And if you want to be coached by me, check the link in the video description. You can join my Discord there, and there's all the information there on how to sign up.